Hello, friends, and welcome back to Stories About Entitled People. Some people have a lot of chutzpah. Well, let's see what our first story brings them. But before we begin, don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you're new here and turn on notifications so you don't miss a new video every single day. Here we go. I missed my return train. Refund my entire trip. I work at the reservation desk / customer service in an amusement park, so I'm used to dealing with all kinds of clients. But this one really got everyone in the office enraged. This summer, a Monday morning, the phone rang. My colleague picked up the phone with the usual, "X-Park, I'm Stacy, how can I help you?" My desk is right in front of hers, so I could see the smile on her face slowly disappear. Here's what happened. The lady on the phone had booked 2 tickets for our park, which cost in total €50 for 2 adults, 59 American dollars. She had come the previous Saturday and had enjoyed her visit. However, when she and her guest decided to leave the park, they realized they'd missed the last train to their return destination, so the lady had to call a cab. She told us she had to pay €100, $118, to go back home. She was furious and asked us to refund her tickets and her cab ride. Of course, my colleague told her it was impossible. She'd already visited the park, validated the tickets, and spent the day there. We're a small amusement center. We can only welcome 1,000 visitors a day. But still, it's in no case our responsibility to make sure our guests don't miss their bus or train. We don't have any shuttle from the train station to the park as it's a 3-minute walk from there. So after politely explaining why we wouldn't refund her tickets, the lady was going on and on about being refunded, at least for her cab expenses. It was ridiculous. And after 15 minutes on the phone, my colleague finally hung up. She was exhausted, and the lady had insulted her with every word in the dictionary. She took a long break outside before she could calm down and take other calls. The next day, the lady called again. This time it was a student doing part-time job in our center that replied. The lady was of course awful to her, and the poor girl was distraught and on the verge of tears. This awoke my mama bear instinct, and I told our student to give me the phone. I politely told the lady off because it was none of our problem. I had all the difficulties in the world to stay polite, but kill them with kindness, as they say. Then I offered hot chocolate to my poor student, who was doing a very nice job but had the misfortune to fall on the worst customer ever encountered in our center. 2 to 3 days later, our boss gets an email from the Office of Consumer Protection. The lady had called them and said we were disrespectful, called her a liar, and laughed in her face. Our customer services were terrible and was the worst she'd ever been treated in her entire life. My colleague and myself were disgusted. My colleague had been nothing but apologetic and polite to that lady, who was just screaming at her for 15 minutes. Same thing with my student and myself. Our boss was scared of the repercussions and sent an email to the lady. He offered her free entry for the inconvenience and a free meal at the park, even though we'd done nothing wrong. Later that day, the lady replied to the email, unhappy again. She said she would not use only 1 free entry. I have 3 children and my husband, so we need at least 5 tickets plus 5 meals, and the guarantee we'll be able to come and go back home after the visit. This time, my boss was enraged. He told her to take the free entry or take nothing, and he didn't care what the impact will be. He enclosed the Office of Customer Protection to the email, as well as corporate. We heard nothing more of it for a while, and our boss told us to blacklist her phone number and her email address. Sometime after, the boss told us corporate had just let him know the lady had been permanently banned from the park. She'd been very rude to them as well. She menaced them to call her lawyer and so on. This whole thing was just totally ridiculous. The nerve of some people. And our second story. Insult your head closer instead of giving a raise? Yeah, sure. There's no way that'll backfire. In the late 90s, I worked at a Subway restaurant, specifically closing shift. That'll be relevant later. At the time, I was paid somewhere between $7 and $8 an hour, a good chunk more than minimum wage, and had me bringing my A game every day. I knew it was just fast food, but I took pride in my work. I showed up early, always covered when people called in, followed the recipes, even the really anal stuff like 2 slices of black olive per 6-inch sub, unless the customer specifically requests more, etc. By all accounts, I was a model employee. Plus, since I worked alone, I was the de facto shift supervisor. That's got to be worth something. I figured I'd ask the regional manager for a raise. Store manager didn't have the authority. Worst he can say is no, right? Wrong. Turns out the worst he can do is insult me and everyone else that works there. He was in one day and I made my pitch. He just went off on me, raising his voice shy, full of yell, and saying something like, "If you were worth more, you wouldn't be working here. You're replaceable. Now go away and don't ever speak to me again. I'm the regional manager and I'm actually important. You just make sandwiches and scrub toilets." Again, not the exact words, but he did make those points quite clearly. I remember being shocked into silence at such a cartoonish display of arrogance coming out of a balding middle-aged man. First time I'd ever encountered a .50 caliber D-bag. I didn't even specify an amount, I just asked for a raise. He could have given me a nickel or even made something up like, "I'm sorry, wages are set by corporate, I can't do it." And while I'd have been disappointed, I would have accepted it. But no, his response to the very concept of any raise was a pretentious, self-righteous indictment against the value of every Subway employee that wasn't management. Or probably him specifically. I genuinely enjoyed working there, right up until that watershed moment. Okay, Cheese D, if that's how you want it, fine. I'll get mine one way or another. I take pride in my work, but 7-something an hour isn't enough to engender any further loyalty after you so flippantly insulted me and everyone working for you. Up until that point, I'd been meticulous about everything I did at work. Like I mentioned earlier, closing shift was a one-man show, which meant I had no supervision. My effectiveness was judged based on the accuracy of my inventory numbers, counting my till, my clock-out times, and whether everything was in order when the openers arrived in the morning. I knew a few tricks to offset inventory, which allowed me to take food home without it being noticed, ring up a small soda as a cheese round since they were both 89 cents, etc. On a good night, I'd take home a dozen or more foot-long subs. On a bad night, I'd just make sandwiches with the loaf of bread I brought from home. I'd also bring in a bunch of empty bottles or jugs and fill them from the fountain after clocking out. I dump entire Cambros full of meat, veggies, and cheese into a bag to take home. Sometimes I'd bake an oven full of cookies with the express purpose of taking them if I could do so without using up the rest of the box, because a box with one raw cookie was counted the same as an unopened box. The moment he made clear what I was worth to him, I started looking for a different job. If he'd given me a token 3% cost of living increase, it'd have amounted to maybe 25 cents an hour. They had me working around 30 to 35 hours a week, just below full-time, so it would have amounted to under $9 a week. Hell, he could have even offered a sincere apology and no raise, and I would have kept on with it. Instead, for the last few months I worked there, every single night, I took home what probably amounted to a couple $100 worth of potential sales. Every single night. At the time, my friends and I, being late teens, early 20s, were still in the party phase of our lives, so every night I worked for those last months, I'd just roll up as the party was getting wild with a bunch of sandwiches, cookies, gallons of soda, etc. Those few months doing the bare minimum and sponging off that dead-end job were way more satisfying than giving my all for 7 and change for an insufferable bag of septic slop. That's more than just petty OP. You went on an all-out revenge spree. It makes you wonder how those in management can't estimate the amount of damage a disgruntled employee can cause in a short time span. F that ego-tripping manager. And our next story. Sir, please remove your fence. While retrieving my mail shortly after moving into my new home, there was a flyer attached to the mailbox post. I read the flyer with interest, finding that it was from a neighbor who purchased the model home at the entrance of our subdivision. The flyer was addressed to all members of the Homeowners Association and essentially informed us that the HOA was using our HOA dues to sue him for not removing a fence from his front yard. The builder erected the chestnut rail fence around the front yard of the model home when it was built, and the purchaser never thought anything about it. A contingent of HOA officers notified him that he had 24 hours to remove the fence or face a lawsuit. Having already faced the wrath of the HOA myself, I stopped at his home to talk with him. After ascertaining the preceding information, I informed him that anything existing on the closing date of the real estate transfer was grandfathered in and therefore the fence was legal. I then proceeded to show this to him in the covenants. At the time, I was an editor with the local newspaper and asked if he minded my writing an article about this incident in the newspaper. He readily agreed, and I went off to discuss it with the managing editor. Between us, we decided to run a series of articles about HOAs and the little Hitlers who run them, highlighting this incident. The series ran 7 weeks on the editorial page, during which time the court case was held and the homeowner won, with the HOA having to pay his legal expenses. He told me that had they asked, he would have removed the fence with no problem. But he was a retired colonel in the U.S. Army and was not used to being ordered to do things. 36 years later, the fence is still there. Always nice when HOAs get their BS thrown back at them. Unfortunate they use the money from other people for their crap. And our last short one. I was told off for not phoning ahead to a customer with an ETA for delivery. So next time I went there, here's what happened. I wasn't aware we had agreed to notify them roughly when I was going to be there and felt he'd spoke to me rather harshly the first time. A week after the original incident, I was heading to the same complex. I watched the curtain twitch as I pulled into the delivery bays. He unlocked his office door. This was during Lockdown 1 in England. I could see him punching the code to open the landing doors. As I located the parcel, I saw him come down and unlock the lobby doors, then punch another code to release the front sliding doors. He snapped very gruffly, "You didn't phone ahead again." I replied in a very cheerful and polite voice, "That's because your neighbor doesn't require me to," and walked past him to the building next door. This is that beautiful time when petty just lands in your lap. What are you going to do? You have to take the golden opportunity and run with it. Executed like a pro. No doubt smiling the whole time. Bravo. Hey guys, thank you all for watching the video. I'll see you in the next one.